Elevating standards, how one luxury resort became a beacon of true hospitality. The story begins at Wellington Crest, a prestigious private school nestled in the affluent hills of the city, where polished marble floors gleamed under the soft hum of climate-controlled corridors and students arrived in black-tinted town cars and imported SUVs. A quiet boy named Kai Dixon occupied a front-row seat in his literature class, his hands folded neatly over a worn notebook, his eyes focused with the calm intensity of someone used to watching the world judge him before he could ever speak. Kai, 12 years old, African-American, well-spoken and always on time, was the kind of student any teacher would praise for his diligence and composure. But in a school where last names opened doors and wealth decided who mattered, he was an anomaly that some found hard to accept. That morning, when Ms. Evans, the silver-haired literature instructor, posed a question about metaphors in To Kill a Mockingbird, the room fell silent until Kai raised his hand with quiet confidence and delivered a thoughtful answer that even Ms. Evans nodded at with subtle approval. But from across the room, Scarlett Reed let out a loud, scoffing exhale, her long blonde ponytail flicking as she turned toward her friends, her voice dripping with theatrical disdain. "Wow, I didn't know they let the help audit classes now." The words hung in the air, sharp as glass, and while a few students chuckled under their breath, others merely looked away, uncomfortable, unsure whether to laugh or be ashamed, unwilling to challenge Scarlett, whose father's name was etched in gold outside a chain of luxury hotels and who wore designer shoes like school uniforms. Kai didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that showing pain only made people feel stronger about causing it. He simply lowered his hand, turned back to his notebook, and let the insult slide off his shoulders like water off stone. But inside, a familiar weight settled, one not of guilt, but of relentless restraint. Scarlett leaned back in her seat, clearly satisfied with the ripple she had caused, whispering just loud enough for her clique to hear, "This place is meant for people who belong here, not charity cases trying to play rich." She said it as if speaking a self-evident truth, as if no one in that room could possibly disagree. And no teacher dared confront her, not because they agreed, but because of the fear that pushing back against a Reed might cost them more than it was worth. It was not the first time. Kai had lost count of how many times Scarlett had dismissed his presence with eye rolls, snide comments, or questions that pretended to be curious but dripped with condescension. She would ask if he lived near the school with a smile that pretended innocence, or if his mother worked for someone important, pretending to forget the difference between being a guest and being part of the staff. Every time, Kai remained composed, his back straight, his eyes steady, his voice neutral, because in a world that refused to give him the benefit of the doubt, composure was not just a choice, it was armor. That morning, as the bell rang and students gathered their tablets and leather-bound books, Kai remained seated for a moment longer, not because he was shaken, but because he knew better than to rush. Scarlett passed him on the way out, her bag slung over one shoulder, her voice once again cutting the air like a blade. "Try not to get too comfortable, Carter. Not every room is meant for everyone." Then she vanished into the hallway, laughter echoing behind her like a mocking reminder that power, even when it's cruel, rarely moves quietly. But Kai, he didn't respond. Not then. He closed his notebook, stood with the kind of deliberate patience learned by those who'd been watched too closely for too long, and walked out of the classroom like someone who knew his moment would come, not through revenge or fury, but through the kind of truth that could not be ignored forever. The following Saturday, under a golden canopy of early morning light filtering through glass skylights, the Solara Resort stirred to life in elegant silence. Waiters in crisp white uniforms moved like clockwork across the breakfast terrace, adjusting napkins, aligning silverware, and placing fruit parfaits with surgical precision. In a corner table under the shade of a cream-colored parasol and surrounded by staff who tiptoed as if around royalty, sat Scarlett Reed, the same Scarlett who, only days before, had mocked Kai Dixon in a classroom she thought he didn't deserve to occupy. Here, in the open-air splendor of one of the most exclusive resorts in the state, she sat with her back straight, one leg crossed over the other, a silk scarf tied perfectly around her neck, sunglasses perched atop her golden curls, sipping slowly from a tall glass of cucumber water that she had just minutes earlier thrown back at a server for being too warm. Scarlett was in a foul mood. The croissants were flakier than she liked. The berries were out of season and sour. The eggs Benedict had a texture like cafeteria slop. And although 5 different employees had cycled through her table in under 15 minutes, each trying to salvage what remained of her tantrum-laced breakfast, nothing pleased her. She had sent the kitchen manager back twice and now sat arms folded, eyebrows drawn, daring someone to approach and disappoint her again. She snapped her fingers without looking up. A young waiter rushed over. "I said truffle oil on the omelette, not this cheap, peppery garbage," she hissed, pushing the plate away as if it carried disease. "Get the head chef, not the assistant, and tell housekeeping to fix the hem on my guest robe. It's dragging on the floor like we're in a third-rate spa." Staff nodded, bowed, and scattered, whispers trailing in her wake like smoke from a fire no one dared extinguish. Scarlett reveled in it, the chaos, the control, the way adults twice her age moved with urgency just because she said so. Power, for her, wasn't earned. It was inherited, expected, and brandished like a whip. Then, through the glass of the main lobby behind the terrace, she caught movement. A boy, alone, calm, composed, walking with deliberate steps toward the front desk. Something in the way he moved stopped her fork mid-air. Her eyes narrowed. No, it couldn't be. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the tile, knocking over a small dish of preserves as she strode toward the main hall. The staff trailing her looked at one another but knew better than to ask. Scarlett pushed open the glass doors leading into the atrium and walked inside, heels clicking in rhythm with her indignation. And there he was, Kai Dixon, in a navy-colored shirt, his hands tucked in front of him, standing politely at the reception desk, speaking to the clerk in a calm, measured tone. Scarlett blinked, as if the mere sight of him here, alone, unescorted, and seemingly unbothered, offended every fiber of her understanding of how the world should work. She didn't wait. "Excuse me," she called out, loud enough for everyone in the marble-floored lobby to hear. "What exactly is going on here?" Her voice, practiced in the art of public shaming, sliced the air. The receptionist, a young woman named Maria, looked up nervously. Kai turned slowly, recognizing the voice before he even saw her face. Scarlett marched forward, arms swinging, her indignation as theatrical as it was venomous. Is someone going to explain why this person is standing at the front desk like he belongs here? She made no effort to hide the disdain. This is a 5-star resort, not a daycare, not a job fair, not an outreach program. Kai met her eyes. He didn't speak. Not yet. Maria, stunned but professional, began, "He has a reservation under." But Scarlett cut her off like a blade. "If you check him in, I swear my father will have your badge, your uniform, and your last paycheck shredded before lunch. You understand?" Her voice was sharp, cold, and loud enough to draw the attention of a bellhop, a concierge, and several seated guests in the lounge. She didn't care. She wanted them to hear. She wanted witnesses. Kai, ever composed, said softly, "My mother booked the suite. I'm just here to check in like she told me." Scarlett's laugh was brittle and cruel. "Your mother? Oh, please. What'd she do? Run errands for someone important? This is the Solara Resort. Unless your last name is carved into the pillars of this building, you're not even supposed to be near the valet." The moment thickened. Maria looked at the screen again, confirming what she'd seen, executive-level priority. The suite was booked by Dr. Lena Dixon herself. But Maria hesitated, caught between truth and threat. Then Scarlett turned to the bellhop. "Call security now." The receptionist opened her mouth, clearly struggling between what her screen told her, that the suite was booked by someone with the highest possible authorization, and what the manager's daughter was now threatening in front of a growing number of onlookers. Before she could speak, a tall man in a navy blazer emerged from a side hallway, Mr. Arthur Reed, Scarlett's father and general manager of the Solara Resort. His expression was immediately irritated. "What's going on here?" he asked, striding over. Scarlett turned, relief washing over her face. "Dad. Thank God. This kid is trying to check into one of our top-floor suites. He says his mom booked it, Lena Dixon, come on." Mr. Reed's eyes swept over Kai in a single glance, and without so much as checking the reservation system, he said, "Son, you need to leave. This is private property. You can't just wander in here pretending to be a guest." Then, in a move so public and deliberate it drew gasps from the nearby lobby guests, Mr. Reed reached forward and gripped Kai by the arm. "Let's go." Kai, stunned by the physicality, pulled back slightly but remained calm. "Sir, I'm not pretending. My mother reserved this room. I'm just here to wait for her." But Mr. Reed wasn't listening. "We've had enough of people trying to sneak into this place for years. You think we're stupid?" And with that, he began to forcefully guide Kai toward the doors, making a scene for everyone to see. But then, the doors of the resort spun open with a slow, deliberate whirl, and in walked Dr. Lena Dixon. She was composed as ever, dressed in a soft gray power suit, heels clicking with every precise step, and a leather briefcase in one hand. Her face was calm, but her eyes were cold steel. She saw her son's arm in Mr. Reed's grip. She saw the horror blooming on the receptionist's face. She saw Scarlett frozen mid-smirk. And without breaking stride, without raising her voice, she said loud enough for the entire lobby to hear, "Take your hand off my son." The entire room went silent. Mr. Reed turned, his jaw slightly slack. "Mrs. Dixon. I didn't realize." But Lena was already pulling out her black lacquered badge holder, flipping it open in one smooth motion. "Dr. Lena Dixon, Chief Executive Officer of Dixon Legacy Hotels. You just physically removed my son from a property that I own." Mr. Reed's face drained of all color. And that was only the beginning. For a moment, no one in the lobby moved. Not the bellhop, frozen mid-step. Not the receptionist, who looked as if she wanted to vanish behind the counter. Not even Mr. Arthur Reed, who stood rooted to the floor, his hand still awkwardly hovering where it had been clutching Kai's arm. The weight of Dr. Lena Dixon's words had dropped like a stone in the middle of a still lake, and the ripples of silence spread outward, reaching every guest, every staff member, every eye now wide with recognition that the balance of power had not only shifted, it had crashed through the ceiling and buried itself in the marble beneath their feet. Lena stepped forward slowly, her heels clicking against the tile with calm, judicial rhythm, her voice even but honed to a blade's edge as she said, "You assaulted a registered guest on private property. You humiliated my son in public, and you did it in front of witnesses, staff, security cameras, and God himself." She paused. "You didn't even ask his name." She turned slightly, just enough to meet the terrified eyes of Maria the receptionist, and said in a tone that made it clear she was not the enemy, "Maria, would you kindly confirm whether the Dixon suite is in fact booked under my name?" Maria's fingers flew across the keyboard with trembling speed, and within seconds, the screen glowed with the information they all now knew was true. "Yes, ma'am. It's confirmed. The Dixon suite, top floor, VIP executive tier." Lena didn't even blink. "And was there any note on the account suggesting that my son, Kai Dixon, would be arriving early for check-in?" Maria nodded rapidly. "Yes, ma'am. It's here in the reservation comments, flagged for early access and expedited concierge service." Lena exhaled once, deeply, not in relief, but in restrained fury, and then turned back to Mr. Reed, who had begun to stammer, "I didn't know, if I had known who he was." She cut him off like a switchblade through fabric. "You didn't need to know who he was, Richard. You only needed to know that he was a child, a guest, and you manhandled him like a trespasser because you assumed, based on the way he looked, that he couldn't possibly belong here." Her voice rose, but only slightly, just enough to command the attention of every ear within range. "You judged my son not by the reservation system, not by policy, not even by behavior. You judged him by skin, by race, by assumption. And you used your position to act on that judgment in front of your daughter, your staff, and dozens of guests." Scarlett, who had remained quiet until now, suddenly stepped forward, her voice shaky but defiant. "This is ridiculous. I didn't touch him. He looked like he didn't belong, okay? Everyone thought it. He was probably lying. But Lena raised one hand, palm outward, and the girl froze as if she'd been slapped without contact. "Young lady," Lena said, her tone sharp enough to carve through marble, "you may not have laid a hand on him, but what you did was far worse. You threatened staff. You weaponized your father's authority. You lied to have a child removed from a property he had every right to enter. And you did it not because he caused trouble, not because he broke rules, but because in your mind, someone like him doesn't deserve luxury." Scarlett's mouth opened again, but nothing came out. Her cheeks had flushed deep red, and she shrank slightly behind her father, who himself was withering under the crushing weight of what he knew was coming. Lena turned to the assistant general manager, who had appeared at the edge of the scene, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Her voice was once again steady, professional, final. "Effective immediately, Mr. Arthur Reed is relieved of his duties. His access to hotel systems is revoked. Security will escort him to gather his personal belongings and remove him from the premises. A formal letter of termination and a civil complaint will follow." Gasps spread through the lobby. Mr. Reed's mouth opened in stunned disbelief. Wait. You can't." Amelia didn't even look at him this time. "I just did." Then she looked to the security guard who had come up from the hall, eyes alert and body rigid. "Escort Mr. Reed off the property. Do not cause a scene. Be courteous, more courteous than he was to my son." Kai, who had remained silent this entire time, standing to the side with a stillness that belied his age, finally looked up at his mother. She met his eyes, softened only for a moment, and then gently nodded. "Let's go check in." As they walked toward the elevator, the entire lobby watched them, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with something far rarer in places like this, respect. And behind them, Mr. Arthur Reed was escorted out of the hotel he no longer controlled, while his daughter stood silently in the middle of a marble palace that, for the first time in her life, no longer bowed to her name. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from that afternoon at the Solara rippled far beyond the gilded walls of the resort. Mr. Arthur Reed's termination became more than a staffing decision. It became a statement, one that sent shockwaves through the ranks of Dixon Legacy hotels and beyond. For years, whispers about his arrogance, his favoritism, and his quiet condescension had circled like smoke around his title, but no one had dared challenge him. Not until Dr. Lena Dixon had drawn a clear and irrevocable line between leadership and entitlement, between authority and abuse. His removal was swift, public, and absolute. And though he attempted to salvage his reputation by claiming a misunderstanding, the security footage told a different story, and the staff testimonies told an even more damning one. Within days, his severance was revoked. His access to industry networks severed, and the Reed name, once synonymous with prestige in certain circles, began to curdle in the mouth of polite company. Scarlett, meanwhile, found her world shrinking faster than she could process. Without her father's position anchoring their lifestyle, the Reeds were forced to vacate the luxury condo they had occupied for over a decade. Credit accounts were frozen, their family name pulled from the preferred guest lists of restaurants, clubs, and boutiques. Scarlett's private school tuition, paid in full annually by a corporate package that no longer existed, was canceled midway through the spring semester. The administration offered no extension, no scholarship, no graceful transition. She was quietly told to clean out her locker by Friday. She left Wellington Crest in silence, her former friends unsure whether to text her or distance themselves completely. The girl who once strutted through hallways with designer handbags and a voice like a courtroom verdict now stood in the front office of a public middle school, clutching a registration folder with trembling fingers, dressed not in luxury linen but in a department store sweater 2 seasons old. Kai never gloated. He never brought it up at school, never mentioned it to anyone, not even when some classmates whispered rumors in the hall or sent him subtle nods of approval, the kind reserved for those who had endured injustice and lived to see it punished. He had no interest in humiliation, only in clarity, and perhaps a kind of quiet justice that didn't require applause. When his mother asked him days later how he felt about what had happened, he simply said, "I didn't want anyone to be ruined. I just wanted to be seen for who I am." Lena had nodded, holding her son's hand a little longer than usual, and knew that she had not only raised a boy who could withstand cruelty with grace, but one who could walk away from victory without needing to trample the defeated. Scarlett, stripped of comfort and attention, began to understand things she had never needed to notice before: the weight of judgment in a stranger's glance, the way a single wrong assumption could shape someone's day or life or worth in the eyes of others. And though there was no miraculous transformation, no sudden speech of apology or weeping at Kai's feet, the silence of consequence spoke volumes louder than any words she could have mustered. Because now, in the absence of her father's shadow, she had to stand in the light of her own actions, and it burned more than she expected. Back at the Solara, things returned to order, though something fundamental had shifted in the air. Staff moved with more awareness. Guests noticed a difference in how policies were enforced, not with fear, but with fairness. Maria, the receptionist, was promoted to floor supervisor after her detailed report helped confirm the timeline of events. Training seminars were introduced company-wide, focusing on implicit bias and guest dignity, not because of public backlash, but because Dr. Lena Dixon did not believe in waiting for scandal to do what was right. And Kai? He finished the school year strong, accepted into an elite summer mentorship program for young leaders, and continued to carry himself with the same composed integrity that had held him steady in the face of contempt. But now when he walked into a room, people looked twice, not because they questioned his place there, but because they no longer dared to. He had not raised his voice. He had not fought with fists. But he had held the line with dignity until the truth had nowhere left to hide. And for those who watched, especially the older ones who'd seen too many times where justice bent the wrong way, it was nothing short of satisfying. Because in a world that so often lets arrogance skate by while integrity pays the price, this time the reckoning came exactly where it belonged. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.